Can everyone hear me? Shall we get started? There'll be some more people coming, but yeah, we can get started, I think. So have any of you started assignment 5? Or is it still, yeah? So one person has started. Nobody else has started? Oh, you have started. It looked complicated. Somebody looked at it on Zoom. Uh-huh. Got you. Yeah. Let me. Thank you, Richard. Somebody on Zoom was saying. I don't know if. Yeah, no, I won't turn that on. Sounds good. So. Just wanted to recap. So this week is the last week of the lectures. Today and the next Thursday we have another lecture, and so I will still have an office hour. My final office hour will be this week. This Thursday, and then I think the same for the TAs. If you still have questions about the assignment, which are due again later on, do email us afterwards, and we'll try to help you with by email. But I think do come this week with any questions about the assignment. So we were talking last time about this idea that how artificial neurons in neural networks are inspired by brain neurons, and we saw how the model of this artificial neuron is very much the same as the perceptron. You remember the perceptron algorithm? We had the same this kind of like neuron where we had many inputs, x0, x1, x2. We had weights for each of these inputs, and the neuron is computing a weighted sum of the inputs. So these are the inputs xi weighted by wi, and we had a bias, and then we apply an activation function f, which is sort of like the analogy in biology is when, for example, after the impulses inside the neuron overcome a threshold, then the neuron starts firing, and that's essentially this activation function of when does the neuron activate and start firing. But it's a much more simplified model than the biological system. So this was the perceptron neuron we saw earlier in the course, and here again, what we have is that the activation function, in particular in perceptron, is this function here, where if all the weighted inputs are bigger than 0, then we activate it with a 1. Otherwise, we set it to -1. And this is the particular form of the activation function that is used in the perceptron algorithm. So it can also be written as this: if the inner product between the weight vector and the x vector of inputs is greater than 0, then we set it a 1. Otherwise, it's a -1. There's many other types of activation functions. We don't have to just use this function. We can use any other kinds of functions like the sigmoid function, tan H function, or ReLU. So remember, like in general, these activation functions should kind of. So for example, look at the sigmoid. So it has two limits. One limit is basically it converges towards 0 at -infinity, and at +infinity converges to 1. So it's sort of like it shows like a switch, like a smooth switch from 0 to 1 that happens around 0 here. Quick question: can somebody tell me what is this activation function? What does it look like for the perceptron? So this one here.
Less than 0, or the inner product of w and x less than 0 should just be a straight line on -1, and it greater than 0 should just be a horizontal line.
Yeah. So it does look like a step function. What I want to say, so it looks like this, then there's a step, and then like this. So that's how that's how this particular activation function looks like. It's a step function, and I don't know, for people on Zoom, let me see if I can draw here. So it does look like this, then like that, and then like this. For those of you on Zoom who couldn't see on the board, so this is how this function looks like. And you see that this one, sigmoid is a smooth version of that step function. Same for tan h. And ReLU is a more simplified model where basically we just set it to identity function beyond 0, and below 0 we set it to just 0. The function is 0. So it's 0 all the way to here, and from here is just identity f of x is equal to x. And can be written as with this formula, max of 0a. In particular for the case of binary classification, what is very common that people do is that they do logistic regression. So the activation function is said to be the sigmoid function, and the loss function is said to be the cross entropy loss we have seen before, where again yi is the label, which can be which is binary 0 or 1. So yes, and then we simply we take the y's and we pass it through the sigmoid. Y is the activation given a particular value. So in general, an artificial neural network is a collection of many of these models of neurons, like multiple of them. So we take this is one model with what we saw earlier with the perceptron, but we put many of them together in layers and inside a layer. So we have generally, for example, what is called a feed-forward neural network is a type of network. We have each node is one perceptron model, and we put many of them inside a layer. We have many of these layers, and we put many of these neurons inside each layer, and we put also connections between. So for example, this neuron gives input to all of these 4 and so on. So in this case, it's an all versus all type of connectivity. So the graph is acyclic. We never have loops in these graphs. It always goes forward. The activations always keep going forward. And generally, the types of choices we have to make are about, in the case of feed-forward neural networks, how many layers do we set? How many neurons per layer do we set? And again, what are the weights? What are the learning rates? What is the type of learning method we use? Do we use stochastic gradient descent? How much stochasticity do we add? We'll see later on we do batch types of learning. What's the size of the batches that we feed to the network? All of these are choices we have to make. How many of you have seen these concepts before? Oh, some. Okay. So, yeah, but not everyone. So let's go through them again. For some of you who have seen them, feel free to ask any questions, any more in-depth questions. But we'll go through these key concepts. So, the multi-layer perceptrons. So, what we said earlier, the neurons are arranged into layers. So, for example, this is a type of like a multi-layer perceptron. We have many layers. We have one input layer here, a few hidden layers, 1, 2, 3, and an output layer here at the end. So these are also fully connected. And what we mean by deep, when such a neural network is deep, is that it has many of these layers stacked together. So instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 100, hundreds of layers, for example. That is a very deep network. And people have seen in the last sort of 10 years, even more, that if you do add a lot of depth, you can increase the complexity of the hypothesis that you can model. So then you can learn much more sophisticated functions that you couldn't learn with a shallow network. Any questions so far? No? Any questions on Zoom? You can type them in the chat. Okay, so how does the multi-layer perceptron work in a bit more detail? So essentially what we have is that let's say this is a function of the ReLU network at layer L and for neuron K, and the output of this is is given by this expression is the maximum between 0 and the weighted sum of the inputs. These are the weights. These are the weights for layer L at neuron K, and we multiply by the inputs X at that particular neuron. So again, this is the picture from these are the weights, these are the X's, and the output is, and F here is this function max between 0 and that. This is what the this is with like and this is, oh, I forgot to say, this stands for rectified linear units. So that's what really stands for. So it's just two linear functions that are below the activation threshold is just 0. Above it is just an identity function. So then we can model that for all the neurons in layer L. We can model this with a matrix. We have the same expression, but now WL is a matrix instead of a vector here. This whole thing was a vector, now it's a matrix. And we multiply by, again, by the same, by inputs X. And when we do, for example, like a multi-layer perceptron with 2 layers, what we notice is that we end up stacking these functions. So for example, so the final output, so this is the network, which will have 2 hidden layers. And what we end up doing is that we end up applying this function once, max over 0 and W1x, and then we apply it again, max over 0, W2 of the previous results. So, and what happens is when we stack these layers together, we end up learning much more expressive functions if we stack it, because these are quite simple, but if we stack many of them, it can starts being able to learn much more complex patterns. In general, the idea is that we do want to also introduce in particular non-linearities, not just any kind of functions. If we just introduce linearity transformations is not going to work. So for example, imagine you have this network here with 3 inputs, 1 hidden layer and 1 output layer. Imagine all of these functions here are linear functions, and this is also linear. And if you do the maths, for example, you will basically still end up with a linear function. If you compose 2 linear functions together, you still end up with a linear function, so you don't gain expressivity. You could as well have modeled it from the beginning with a single linear transformation. Does this make sense? So if you stack even 10 linear transformations, it's not going to give you anything extra. It's as if you did a single linear transformation. So therefore, we have to introduce non-linearities for this to work. They can't just be linear transformations. So of course, again, more layers can model more complicated spaces. And in general, what they do is that what a neural network that has non-linearities and that has multiple multiple layers is that, for example, so each neuron essentially partitions the space. So for example, this is for example the partitioning done by 1 neuron. This is the partitioning done by a full layer, or by a single layer of a neuron. It's generally a convex shape that, because each one is saying, oh, you have to be on this side. This one is saying you have to be on this side, and so on. So then you end up with a convex sort of shape. And then to gain, for example, concavities in the pattern that is learned, you have to add an extra hidden layer and even more extra ones. So for example, and then you can start like learning, for example, concave objects and patterns and so on, and even much more complex ones. Does this make sense? Yeah? The other layer can add the concavities. The extra hidden layer that you have, like this one in this case here. You see now this shape can be concave, for example, intuitively.
Can you elaborate a bit more about what you mean by non-linearities, or adding them in? How?
Yeah. So mostly this actually. These ones. So for example, if these activations were all linear, it wouldn't have worked. Like for example, if you had if this function, remember the idea is that
because
you
it's
have,
always one or the other if it were linear.
if it were linear, you could write it with a single linear transformation. Even if you stack 10 layers, you could write it with it's as if you applied one single layer. That's it. It doesn't add more expressivity. The reason why is because of the math. It's basically mathematics. It's this example I think is quite done. So these are the x's. You pass them through a linear transformation you multiply them by theta once, and then in the second layer you apply them multiply by another theta, and then you sum all the inputs again. And what happens is that so this sum can come outside, for example, and you can combine. Actually, this is written as a vector now, so it's written literally as a vector. You see vector of transpose times x, so instead of this whole sum. And then what happens is you can just group these two thetas together into one theta hat, which is also linear transformation. So essentially it doesn't work if you just stack linear transformations. You have to have nonlinearities. And the only way you can introduce it, at least in this model, is through the activation functions f here.
Because the layering of these nonlinear activation functions kind of amplifies the effect of their nonlinearity, or?
Say it again? The layering.
So if I have multiple
yes.
nonlinear activation functions,
Yes.
More and more nonlinear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. In general, you always have this form is always going to be a linear transformation of inputs linearly multiplied by some weights. It's always going to be the way you introduce it afterwards. A nonlinearity is in the activation function, this f here. There was another question there? Yeah.
When there are multiple layers, so W becomes a matrix, and if there's one neuron, the W is a vector.
Say that again. I didn't get the question.
So if there's one neuron, so W is a vector, and if there's multiple neuron in a layer, the W becomes a matrix. W.
I don't get it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me.
So
close.
the W becomes a matrix when there is multiple neurons in a layer. Right?
Oh yeah. When there's multiple neurons in a layer, this W, this W here, LK is still a vector. It's a vector of weights for neuron K at layer L. This thing becomes a matrix.
I see.
This is for all the neurons in layer L. Yeah.
Can you explain the softmax output again?
Softmax, yes. So what can the question? Can we explain the softmax output again? So it's basically this. It's this expression max of 0 and W1 times x. What this is doing is that this max between 0 and something else, a function x, for example, what this looks like is, so if you do a plot, so this is max between 0 and x. So whenever x, this is a function of x. So this is your x here. This is the x-axis. So whenever, I don't know if you can see. Why don't I redo it? More here. So you have max between 0 and x. So you have a plot. This is your x. And this is f of x. This is a function of x. Can you see? Yeah. So the f of x is max between 0 and x. So, and you're trying to plot, this is y. So you're trying to plot y here, and this function will be below 0. This will be like this. It will just be 0 because max between 0 and something negative will be 0, and positively it will be just x. It will be just this, just x. So that's what the softmax means. And this is called also like ReLU activation. Okay. So again, so the idea with multi-layer networks is that we have many transformations of linear and nonlinear functions. So for example, this is all a transformation of, it's a nonlinear function of a linear combination of nonlinear functions of linear combinations, and so on, and it keeps going on and on and on, depending on how many intermediate layers we have. So in this case, again, the output of this whole network would be, it looks like this is G of sum over neurons J in this and then over like a G of another sum and so on. So basically, it's many composed transformations. So the linear combinations here are just like the weights multiplied by X. The nonlinearity is given by G.
Can you go back one second? So
Yeah.
Just following, it's reading the little bit on the right, you kind of start from the right side, right? So this is a nonlinear function, that's our rightmost. That's a linear combination of the last layer, which consists of nonlinear functions, which are in turn linear combinations from the last layer before that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. You start, if I got it, yes, if you got it correctly, you start from here. This is where the network starts. And the output will be here, it comes here. So this in a parenthesis, these x's are the inputs here. They get multiplied. So linear combination, nonlinear function G, another linear combination with another weights, nonlinear function G. Yeah. Again, we have to decide on all these things: number of layers, number of neurons, types of neurons, connectivity. These are all types of decisions we have to make when we build neural networks. We also have to think about the representation power, like how more, for example, how many layers could we need to model our particular problem? For a vision task, we might need a lot of layers. For something much simpler, maybe that works with some structural data, it might not be that we might not need that many layers. We also need to think about regularization. Sometimes, generally, the approach has been in the field that we add many layers, many neurons, and then we regularize afterwards with, for example, things like dropout. And what dropout means is that we simply end up randomly dropping some neurons during training to make it more robust. Because this way, sometimes you can introduce redundancies, and sometimes they can be good. So that's what dropout means. So you don't have a single neuron that is critical, and then if you drop that out, the whole thing crashes. So this way it makes the network more robust. So we'll see that how to learn the weights is by doing stochastic gradient descent, and we've seen that already. We've seen gradient descent already for linear regression and for more simpler models, but we use the same thing also for neural networks. And there's also more sophisticated techniques to learn these weights, such as momentum techniques, adaptive gradients, again, and so on. So there's methods that, for example, use like Hamiltonians, that use inertia, like all these kinds of techniques that we can use to optimize them. So we will have a function. Again, we always have a loss function, as we had in previous models. And our loss function here will be, again, based on the inputs x, the outputs y. If it's a supervised learning task, we'll have outputs y. And we also have weight vectors, w. So the loss function is the function of these variables. And we take the gradient of the loss with respect to the weight, w. This will be our optimization task. And we do that using backpropagation, which we'll go through right now. And backpropagation in particular is a very efficient technique for evaluating the gradient of our loss function. And it basically, fundamentally, it uses the chain rule of calculus. And even more, apart from using the chain rule, we also make use of something called dynamic programming, where when we break up a problem into subproblems, for example, we only compute each subproblem once. We don't recompute them multiple times. We have to keep track of which ones we have done, and we don't solve it again. This is the idea. So it avoids recomputing the sub-expressions repeatedly. This is what dynamic programming does. It does not do it twice. But let's look at backpropagation. This is a very important concept in neural networks, and I think it's important to go through it to understand the fundamentals. So in general backpropagation, what we want is to compute the gradient of a loss function, as I said earlier, with respect to the weights. So the gradient here would be a vector of many derivatives with respect to each weight parameter, so W111 and so on. And here, the indices, what they mean is, so for example, this will be the gradient of the loss with respect to W, the weight at layer L, which goes to neuron K from neuron I. So let's look at the graph. So here, for example, this is W224. So it means that we had layer 2, which is the hidden layer. This is layer 1, layer 2. Let me do it for people on Zoom as well. So input layer 1, this is layer 2. We're looking at W224. So so this is W2 because it's in the second layer, and it goes from neuron 4, so from 4 to 2, to neuron 2 here in this other layer. So this is what the indices mean. So when we use notation, so we compute the gradient with respect to all the weights of the loss with respect to all these weights, W, L, K, I. And for this, we use the chain rule of calculus. So, and this is the chain rule. So if we have a function of A, the gradient of A with respect to W is the gradient of A with respect to B, B to C, and C to W. So we can introduce any intermediate variables and do it via those intermediate variables. And intuitively, you can think of them as these would cancel out, because you can cancel out this one with this one and this one with this one. So you're only left with dA over dW. So for example, our loss function could be a sum of squared errors. And actually, here, I know we have been using the notation that y is the label. But actually here in this example, it's actually flipped. Y is the prediction and T is the label. And it's just to keep the same notation as in the Bishop book, in the pattern recognition book. But so it has a flip notation, but otherwise it's the same. So it's one of them is a prediction, and one of them is the true label from the data set. So how do we compute the gradient with respect to these parameters? So let's see an example. So we want to compute the gradient of the loss function with respect to W224, for example, this one here. What is it equal to? So we first notice that Y2 is equal to the sum of the weights coming to the neuron times the outputs of the hidden layer. So ZJ. So the Y2 would be here. This is Y2. This neuron. So weights coming into there times all these hidden. So we sum over all the possible hidden inputs that can come to that. So these are the ZJs are all these hidden layers. So to compute the gradient of L with respect to this parameter, so we do the gradient of L with respect to Y2 first, and then the gradient of Y2 with respect to W224. So the first term, L with respect to Y2, this is this equation. So it's just our sum of squared errors. This is what the loss function is. We just put the loss function. It's a function of y's. And yi for I equals 1 to 2. So y1 minus t1 squared plus y2 minus t2 squared. The gradient of that with respect to y2. And the second term will stay the same. And this equals to, here one of the terms cancel out because we have both y1 and y2, but we only care about y2. So then we're only left with y2 minus t2. Because when we do the gradient, the 2 comes in the front and cancels with this 1 over 2. We're just left with that. And here, this term, the gradient of y with respect to W224 is z4 because of this equation here. Because y is a linear combination between w's and zj. And because we only want the gradient with respect to w2 to 4, we only left with z4. And that's why we have z4 here. And this is z4 times, and this delta 2, this is how we're going to call this, this sum and this particular gradient. We're just going to label it like that, the delta 2. And this idea is the idea from dynamic programming that we save that gradient because we will reuse this for another computation later on. So we have this gradient, we computed it, and then we're just going to save it as delta 2. So what if we wanted to do another example? So this one with W111 instead of this other weight. So here, so I've actually I've labeled these again. So this is Y1, this is Z1, and we have an activation here coming into Z1 from all these weights. So for all these three input neurons, we have activations coming from them. This is just some notation that I labeled here, and this is the weight. This weight is just this edge here on top. This is weight 111. So how do we compute the gradient of L with respect to 111? Again, we define our terms. So Z1 is a function of the activation. Activation is a weighted sum of all the inputs x into the node times the weights. This is the activation. So all these three edges define the activation. And basically so the gradient of L with respect to W111 is that the gradient of L with respect to A1, the activation A1, times the gradient of the activation with respect to the weights. And then we take the first term and we break it apart again with chain rule. We keep applying a chain rule here. So look here, what did we apply here? Was it chain rule or something else? It is chain rule. We just introduce another variable in between that you can think of it as intuitively as a cancel out, so you just get. And then we break this again apart into two more, again also with chain rule. dl over dA1 is dl over dy over dA. And when we sum over all these y's, because we have multiple y's, we have two of them, y1 and y2. And this term here on the right is just x1 because of this equation. Because the activation is just a function, a weighted sum of the inputs. So this becomes, again, this gradient here. So let me go back. This in blue becomes, we label it delta 1, 1. This becomes x1. And then we compute delta 1, 1. Again, we write out these sums, and we apply another chain rule again here. So we apply delta L over delta Y. And here, this term, we break it apart to do another chain rule. So delta Y over delta A becomes this. It becomes, so for those of you on Zoom, so this term becomes this here. So we introduce the Z variable, so delta Y over delta Z over delta A. And if you do the calculations, each of these terms, it becomes that. So delta Z over delta A, we have this equation from this equation here. It's just f prime of A1. This is f prime of A1. Delta Y over delta Z is this. And this term, again, we label it as delta 2i. This is the, again, another gradient that we save. Any questions? Any questions on Zoom? You can go through some of these at home as well in the slides, and there is a homework assignment on this, on exercise 2, so you'll have to do some of this, more like implement it. but you can have a look at home also to go through these at your own pace. So how do we train with backpropagation? So we basically, we have a way, this whole thing, while we're doing this whole math, is that we have a way to compute the gradient of L with respect to W's. This is really a big takeaway I want you to take. Even before you try to understand all the math, we always try to compute the gradient of a loss function with respect to these weights. These are the parameters that we have to estimate in the learning task. And all this gives us is a way to compute this term. All of this math is just, it tells us this is how it ends up, but we have a way to compute it efficiently and fast. If we had no way to compute it fast, then this would be quite problematic. This is actually one of the problems in general that people are trying to solve even now in machine learning, is that for many problems we have no way to compute these gradients very efficiently. And that's why the problems are hard to optimize and intractable. People are making all kinds of, for example, simulators that are differentiable. So basically the functions in the simulator you're trying to simulate whatever, or any kind of simulator, those functions are differentiable, so you can compute these gradients, and you can do backpropagation or other things. These are active areas of research, so it's not easy to compute the gradients for any kind of arbitrary functions. We have it easy here because these are all linear transformations, but it's not always the case that you have linear functions like that and you can compute gradients. So in general, we do gradient descent until convergence. So again, we compute the gradient of the loss with respect to the weights, and then we take a step in the direction that minimizes our loss function, and we keep iterating. And in particular, we do it in batches. Sometimes we don't, if we have a large data set of images, we cannot load all the images into memory and do this backpropagation for all like 1 million images at once. So we do it in batches, like 10 by 10 or 100 by 100. This way, it's much more efficiently. Generally, that's actually a powers of 2, these batches, just for memory reasons. And we have something called the forward propagation, where we basically, what we do is that we start from the input layers and we go forward in the network. And what we do is we compute the value of the loss function. And then we have something called the backpropagation, where having computed the loss function, we go back and compute the gradients as well of the loss function with respect to the weights. So here will be our loss function. We go back and we compute the gradient of the derivatives of the loss with respect to these weights. So not with respect to the input. You can also do it with respect to the input, but with respect to the weights of each of these edges in the graph will have a gradient. And we do gradient descent. So again, we have our current estimates of the weight of a particular weight will be the previous estimate of the weights that we update with this update step, and this would be the gradient of the loss for data point m, for image m, for example, any data point m, with respect to this particular weight, and we multiply this and we take the average of that. So instead of the sum, we divide by m to compute the average gradient, and then we multiply by eta. And eta here is just a step. It's like a step size. How big of a step do we take in the direction of the gradient? Do we take small steps or large steps? It can be important. If you take 2 small steps, the steps are too small, it will take a very long time to converge. If you take very large steps, what could happen? What do you think could happen if we take very large steps? It will diverge. Why?
Because whenever it has to reach the minimum, it can just shoot out.
Yeah,
And
it can. Yeah.
the loss will increase, and therefore.
Yeah. So then the training can diverge. Yes. So our colleague was saying the training can diverge because I'm repeating for those on Zoom because it can be unstable, and then it can shoot out and diverge. So this is an example of doing multi-layer perceptron digits, for example, on something called an MNIST data set. So this is a data set where we have images of digits, for example. So these are pixels in an image. These are grayscale images. And we have a digit 3 here. This is digit 3. And we have a network of many layers, input layers, hidden layers, and output layers. So here we just have 2 hidden layers with 512 neurons in each. And our output is to detect what is the digit that we expressed in the image, if it's from 1 to 10. And we can implement this in many of these deep learning frameworks, in TensorFlow, in PyTorch, in Keras, JAX, and so on, in your favorite deep learning framework. And this is a simple example of how you do that in Keras. So you see it's very simple. It's just you build a model here in these first lines. What you do is you have an initial model, you add 512 neurons on one layer with a particular type of activation, which is ReLU, rectified linear units. Then you add something called dropouts just to make it more robust, and then we add another layer. And at the end, you just provide your loss function, which is, for example, the cross-entropy loss. And you provide the optimizer, RMS prop. There's many other ones like Adam, like stochastic gradient descent, and so on, and your performance metric, which will be the accuracy. And then you just fit the model, and you compute the test loss and accuracy. So you get something like 98% on after 20 epochs. So in general, we want. So far, what we've been discussing about are feed-forward networks. These are networks that are generally fully connected, but not necessarily fully connected. Still, you could have some missing edges, but they still always they have layers of neurons, and they have many-to-many connections. Sometimes there's been a lot of research early in some in the 60s, 50s, 60s of how vision works, how vision systems in animals work. For example, in here in cats, the cat experiment. Many other experiments have been done on other kinds of on mice, on flies, on monkeys, and people have shown that generally what the brain does is that it does some kind of convolution, what is called a convolution operator. Sometimes a convolution will come shortly what it is, but it's like a much more efficient way of applying transformations on images than using feed-forward neural networks. And the idea is that sometimes you want to have this something called translational invariance, where you basically have the same kind of output, wherever the object is. Even if you see a bird, for example, like if you're a cat and you see a bird, even if you see it here or more to the right or to the left or higher or lower, it will sort of give you the same output, just translated. So basically, it has some good invariances that are very important to model. So here in this example, in this study by Hubel and Weiser in 1959, what they did is that they had a cat. They showed a stimuli, for example, like a bar, and then they measured in the brain the electrical signals in the visual area. And they saw, for example, and they measured multiple, let's say, function like convolutional operators. And then when this operator was not aligned with that stimuli, it wasn't giving you any result. But when it was aligned, when you see this one is oblique and this one has the same angle, then it was giving you signal. So the orientation. So basically, and I don't know all the details of the paper. I haven't actually read it, but I know the general idea is that they sort of figured that the brain is organized in a very hierarchical way. So it has a hierarchical kind of structure of cells, and this is actually quite well known these days, how the visual cortex has many layers, V1, visual layer 1, visual layer 2, up to visual layer 5. So they all organized hierarchically, and it seems to be. And the hypothesis is that because nature has sort of given us these brains, us humans and animals, these kinds of brains, there must be something good about the architecture and maybe efficient about the way this is done. So we we're just trying to mimic nature essentially by inspiring from neuroscience. And it's actually one thing that is actually quite popular in machine learning is how people are heavily inspired by neuroscience in these algorithms. So what is the idea of a convolutional network? So how do we work with them? So what we have generally is an input layer, which is now an image. Now we have, for example, a 2D image. Don't just have like a one-dimensional layer of neurons. We have a 2D image. And what we define is something called a filter. We define a filter that I'll show very shortly. So what is a filter? A filter is something like this. It's also called a kernel or convolution, any of these. But basically, it's something like, for example, a 3x3. This is a 3x3 filter. And basically, it's a set of weights that you basically slide this filter across the whole image, and you get outputs for each box. So for example, here, if you have a filter that does an average of all these pixels, these 3x3 pixels, you just put, for example, what would be a filter that does the averaging of all these pixels? How would it look like?
All ones.
Yes, all ones, yes. So something like this. So that means that you do a weighted sum. So these are weights. So then when you have some pixel in the background, like let's say some values behind, I don't know, you multiply this by some pixel values, like 7, 8, 2, 4, 5, something like this. Then you basically add all these numbers, and you divide by the total number of elements by 9. So then you compute an average of all of these. So you do an average. So this will give you a single pixel. A single pixel that will be an average of all of these elements. But you can do something much more, like you can have filters that detect edges, for example. So if you have a filter like this, 1, 1, 1, or I don't know, 0, -1, 0. I don't know exactly how they look, but something like this. This would detect a line that is like that, that looks like that, for example, in the image. So that's how, and we keep sliding this filter all the way. So you see now we slid to the right, and we compute a new pixel in the new image, and so on. And we keep on sliding it across the entire image up until we fill up we finish the entire image like that. And this is what is called a convolution.
So the goal of this should be to like recreate the image it's looking at, right? Or to recognize it?
Not only recreate, but even transform it. You want to transform it a bit. You want to notice a bit how the new image is a bit smaller in resolution, because it's a 3x3, and you'll have 2 pixels less on each side. Yeah. You're also transforming it. You're making it smaller, and these new pixels will be a bit different than the original ones. And you keep applying many of these convolutions, small transformations, up until you get a completely new representation of the image.
So where you would kind of switch between filters to use for each convolution, right? Would you use the same filter for each convolution, or would you use a different filter?
Different filter. It can be
so like you're using this one, and then you could use like the one you just mentioned to recognize the diagonal lines.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is these. How many weights does this have? This filter have? 9 weights. Yes, 1, 2, 3. So 9. This means we have 9 parameters we have to optimize. Yeah, with gradient descent. Now imagine if you have multiple channels. What if you have this is a grayscale, like for grayscale. What if you have RGB, like red, green? We have 3 channels now.
27.
You have 20. Yeah, you multiply by the number of input channels, for example, which will be 3. So then you have like 9 times 3, 27. If you have more than one output channel, if you have, like, say, 2 channels as output, 3 as input, 2 as output, then you have to multiply by 2 as well. So you get 9 times 3 times 2. So you get more parameters you have to optimize. But all of these are parameters you have to optimize with gradient descent. These will be our weights from here. We were talking about earlier. These will be our weights we have to optimize with gradient descent. But now these weights are just the weights in this filter. And the key thing is that because this filter is shared and translated across the whole image, we don't have to learn different weights for these other pixels. Somewhere here, we apply the same filter across the entire image. So it's a way of sharing parameters for all the pixels. Now we don't have to have these many-to-many connections anymore. Yeah. So for these pixels here, we'll be using the same filter in this corner here, the same filter, which means the same parameters.
Oh, so we don't have to re-optimize.
We don't have to re-optimize. These pixels, this corner here, will not have a different set of parameters. They'll have the same parameters as these ones, which will be those 9 parameters. That's it. This is a mistake some people were making when they were first trying to understand these networks. There's something called dense networks which do that, but here with the standard convolutional networks, we share the filter across the entire image. So this way we have many fewer parameters we have to optimize. If this was a multi-layer perceptron, like with the feed-forward network, then we would have had different parameters coming from each of these neurons, let's say, which was in pixels. Okay, I hope you got it. And filters, they also define a dot product. You can write this averaging of the filter also as a matrix operation in linear algebra. So you have a weight, a filter weights, you multiply them by the inputs. So it's a dot product of the weight times the pixel values. And after the convolution, we typically also apply the activation. So don't also forget that. After the convolution, we apply this. So remember, you always do the inputs times the weight. You always do that. And then you also pass them to some activation function. And that's typically ReLU, rectified linear units, but there can be other activation functions you could have. Yes. So, and again, this is what I was saying earlier for when you have multiple channels, red, green, and blue, you will have multiple filters for each of them. So, and the parameters, again, you'll have more parameters that you optimize. So you have like, yeah. There's a few operations that are important to understand when we work with filters. So like what is stride, what is padding, what is pooling. Like these are all things you will encounter when you try to, for example, implement a neural network. And you'll have these functions, and you'll have like, oh, what is the stride of the filter, and so on. So you have to. So what is the stride, for example, controls the shifts of the filter. So the stride means, for example, instead of jumping 1 pixel at a time, we jump 2 pixels at a time. So notice here, and let's go to a previous example. So here, instead of translating them to 1 pixel in the next step, we can jump 2 pixels at a time or 3 at a time. If that makes sense. And that's what it gives. That's a stride of 2 or 3. That's what it means. So instead of going to here, we go straight to the next one. We jump 2 at a time, so it will be here, for example, with this. So we jump 2 pixels to the right. Padding means that we add zeros around the border. And this way, if we pad the image, then we can keep the exact same resolution. So we don't lose the border pixel. We won't end up with a slightly smaller image. You can do that with padding. And pooling, what pooling means is that we can, it's an operation that can help us to reduce the spatial size. So pooling, for example, there's many types of pooling, like for example, like max pooling. And max pooling, what it would do is that, for example, in this particular example, if you split your image into 4 chunks, red, green, yellow, and blue, you take the maximum number in each category. So within the reds, for example, you take the maximum, which is 6 here. So you put a 6 here. Within the green, the maximum is 8, so you put 8, and so on. So it's a way to summarize information from your image. Does it make sense? So you can do another thing, min pooling, for example. You can do also min pooling. So then instead of taking the maximum within the red chunk, you take the minimum number, or so on. Or you can do average pooling, you take the average, and so on. So this way you reduce a lot the size of the image. So then, what people do is that we put all of these together into a full neural network. So then you have, for example, like a digit, which is this is an image of the digit 5, which is an image which is 28 by 28. We pass it through many convolutional layers like this, for example, like which have like, for example, 10 filters. Then what people do, for example, then you do like a max pooling operation. So we bring the size of the image down to from 24 by 24 to 12 by 12. So we reduce it by each size by half. And then we do more convolutions, another max pooling, and so on, up until we get to like a very small size, which is 4 by 4, and we do again many convolutions. And finally, at the end here, we have these layers which are fully connected layers, and these are fully connected exactly like the multi-layer perceptron from before. And then we predict the output. And this very last step here, this is sort of like learning much more like complex mappings, and this is application specific. So it's not anymore. This is specific, for example, for like predicting digits in the image. The network will learn what are the patterns that predict a 5. These kinds of convolutional layers up until here, they still work on images. You still have to have spatial structure. But here, not anymore. You don't need to have that much spatial structure anymore in the fully collected layers. Does that make sense? Yeah? Any questions on this?
What is dropout?
Dropout is when you take your network. Like let's think of the fully connected, this one, not the convolutional one. You randomly drop out edges.
Oh, so dropout 0.25 is randomly drop out 25.
Exactly. That's what it means. Drop out 0.25. Yeah.
I guess so. In cases where it's really close on what the decision should be, would that dropout help? It's
because imagine this setting. Imagine one neuron was critical for your classification task. This one neuron. If you drop it out, let's say a neuron. Actually, gosh, I forgot if it was on edges or if it was on neurons. I think you can do on both actually. You can do both on neurons and on edges, like 25% of the edge. Yeah, but let's say if one neuron was critical for your task, it's actually not very good because there's not enough redundancy in the network. Like sometimes you need.
You want to make a decision based on 10 neurons.
Yeah.
So
like you want. Yeah.
Drop out 25% says here's a 25% chance to drop any neuron or edge.
Any neuron. Yeah.
Controlling the whole thing, whereas if this one isn't there, then
yes.
There's more of a groupthink decision.
Yeah. So the whole thing, if one neuron was critical and it gets dropped, then the whole thing collapses. So it has to be robust. So as a result, for it to
you can still classify this.
Still classify. Yeah.
With
dropout 25%.
I see.
Then the network gets more robust. Yes. That's what it's doing. So it learns. In that case, it keeps on dropping out randomly many random neurons, and it learns to do it in a way in which it doesn't depend on just like a few neurons. It collectively kind of I think this is actually important. Imagine even a human organization, societies. Imagine there's a committee, for example, like of people that, let's say in government, and they decide, like, or in parliament, for example, like and they decide the future of the United States, for example. So, and imagine if one person was critical in that whole decision-making process, then that would be bad in the sense because it's not resilient enough. The system is not robust enough. What happens? What if that person gets sick, for example, for 2 weeks and it cannot come to take decisions? So, if that's not the case, if the parliament can still make decisions even with 25% less people, for example, like in or in Congress can make decisions with 25% less people, then that means it's robust. It's like a robust system. It still works even if so it's the same thing with the networks here, with the neural networks, exactly the same. Yes, question. Huh?
We have a dropout rate, so when we actually make prediction, do we make with, suppose you have dropout rate of 0.2, so while making prediction, do we just use 80% of neurons?
Yes, yes, exactly. It's as if you drop 20% of the neurons, yes.
So we drop a fixed set of neurons, or is it random?
No, it's a random set.
It's a random set, but the proportion is you set it. Like you say, I want to drop 20%. That one will be.
If you have 100 neurons, you're going to drop 20 of them every time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
which 20?
Which 20 that can be random.
No, does this happen only during training or also while prediction?
Training.
So during prediction, we use all 100 neurons or only 80?
It's not you don't change it afterwards once the training stops because you could still it should still work, but you'll have lower performance. Yes,
So
if you
we
drop.
use all neurons while making actual prediction.
Oh, yeah, once the training stops, yes.
What if we drop out those unimportant? What if we drop out those unimportant connection on the neurons?
What if we drop out an important connection?
Unimportant.
An unimportant, nothing much will change.
Yes,
That's
but,
not
but,
important.
but our purpose is to like drop out those critical ones. But if we randomly just
No, yes, but because of the dropout, the training will be in such a way that there won't be a critical one anymore. It won't appear because it can be dropped randomly. So in some sense, the network will learn to find some weights and some neurons such that there's no like critical one. There's no one critical one, or even a few, like 5 or 10 critical ones. There's only it will do it in such a way so they won't appear anymore. That's why dropout will be a mechanism which will kind of prevent these from appearing, these important weights or neurons. Okay, shall we take a quick break? Because let's take a short, because we've done a lot. Let me see, 1 second. Yeah, let's take a short 5-minute break, and then I'll show you some. We'll play a bit. I hope you have laptops, so we can do some. We can play with the neural network and see how training works. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Hi, could you hear me on Zoom? I just see that you couldn't hear me. You can hear me. Okay, great. We have so the problem has been the strike actually, and the graders are on strike, so we don't have resources to grade them. So we're late with them. We'll be late with them because of the strike. Otherwise, we would have released them by now.
We need to give everybody passing grades. We can deal with that.
That would be easy. Yes. Okay, so let's get started. Yeah. So can you all go? I hope you brought laptops. Can you all go to that link, playground.tensorflow.org? So for those of you on Zoom, I pasted the link on the Zoom chat, so you should have it there. Let's all go there, and I send it to everyone. Yeah. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So I can still, if you have any questions also on Zoom, do post them on the chat. We can see them. So what are we gonna do? This is like a neural network playground. It's actually very nice. We can see many things. So first of all, this is the data set, for example. So we have like different types of data set. This is like, one class in the center and another one, on the outside. So we have two classes. So the problem will be a classification task. For example, like, how do you separate between these groups of points? These are input features on the left. So, so one of them is x1. So x1 is this axis. So then, which is x, this axis here. So if we, and I cannot do both, but this is x1, this is x2. Again, so depending on that level, like, if you are above 0, then you have like, or below and so on. X1 squared will look like this. X2 squared looks like this. X1, X2 looks like this, and so on. So all of these, and sine and cosine. So these are, for example, input features we can choose to provide to the network. So do I give?
And X1 and X2 are just linear?
Linear, yeah. No, it's just X1. It's not even, actually, the colors are, look here, the color scale is kind of from -1 to 1. It's just feature x1, that's it.
So if we pop off feature x2,
Yeah.
is there anything?
What's the question?
I was wondering how it changes if we remove feature x, if we only feed it x1 and not x2.
Yeah, so let's try that. So you just deactivate it. You just have x1 in that case. So you just have x1, and we have, for example, 4 neurons intermediately, and 2. So we have 2 hidden layers. So look here, in the first hidden layer we have 4 neurons. In the second hidden layer we have 2 neurons, and then we can just try that. For example, so we just hit run. So you see, it doesn't work. It doesn't seem to converge like that. We need more. So we stop it. We add x2, for example. Let's try now. So now you see, now it's learning. So now it found a way, for example, to classify these points. So this decision boundary, the ones inside this would be, yeah. So it's not, you see, it's not a perfect circle,
So we can,
but
you
it's,
can
yeah.
kind of see how each neuron here is a linear combination of x1.
Exactly. So you can see how each neuron is a linear combination of the previous ones, and you can see the weights. You see the weights are the thickness of the line defines how big the weight is. So for example, look at this weight here. It doesn't matter that much. Going from this neuron to that neuron, the weight is super small. It's 0.27 versus this one, which is 2. So this is 10 times smaller, this small weight. And same, this is another super tiny weight. It's actually even negative. So they can be negative, the weights. They don't have to be positive. They can be negative. So how about we do the following thing? How about you try on just this data set, the first one. I'll give you like 2 or 3 minutes, and you try playing around a bit. Try playing around with the number of neurons, the number of hidden layers. So here I can add more hidden layers and more neurons in each layer, and see what happens with these. And also try playing around also a bit with the regularization rates. Like for example, this like regularization, the learning rate. Try to increase the learning rate from 0.3 to 1. See what happens. Change the activation, change the regularization, and so on. So I'll just give like some time just for you to play around a bit with that. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's it going? Shall we give more time, a few more minutes, or is it a good so for now? Okay, a few more minutes. Here's something to try as well. So a few things. You can add noise to the data set. So you see here, if I keep adding more noise, now they get up more mixed, for example. So there's more overlap between the classes with this noise bar. You can also show the test data here. If you tick this box, you can show the test. With this, you can show the test data set as well that is being evaluated on. You can overlay it on top.
How does the regularization rate relate to the learning rate?
The learning rate is how big the steps are you make.
Yeah.
The regularization rate is the weight of the regularization factor. It's like it's when we were doing in least squares, for example, we were doing some. So here in neural networks, what it is. So they say it's what? Regularization with L1, for example. So what you do is you have your loss between the weights, x's and y's, plus a regularization rate, lambda, times the L1 norm of the weights. Can you see?
Yeah.
So this is the rate lambda. Lambda is how much importance do you place on that regularization factor?
Okay.
Is the parameter controls, like, if you're on more regularization or less regularization.
I noticed when you put regularization above higher than the learning rate, it doesn't converge at all.
When regularization is higher than the learning rate, it doesn't converge. Let's try it. So
These have been the same thing for a long time.
yeah, could take a long time. So high regularization means that you want your solution to be very simple in terms of the L1 norm, which means you want the weights to be close to the origin. Again, so sometimes, which means you don't like having high weights, high value weights. Generally, you want them to be like as small as possible, generally. So that's why you see with the weights, when the regularization is very high, the weights are all super small. They don't end up, they don't have enough force to
super small weights on top of
a small learning rate. Yes.
But then as long as the learning rate is bigger than it, then
if you set it to 0 and if you reset, now they're bigger. No, and they can end up being. You see now this one increases to a lot. Yeah, some of them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. The line in the output, so it shows the test loss and the training loss, both of them. So you see, let me run them again. Let's add some noise, because I think you'll see that better with the noise. So there were initially two lines. Wow, I'm going too fast. 1 sec. How about this? Yeah. So the black one is the loss on the test data set. Test loss, and the gray one is the loss on the training data set. The test data, so you see this is the training data set. If you click now on this thing, it also overlays a test data set, which will be like a different sample from the same, remember, from that same instantiation. Like they all come from the same kind of general setup. There's always like, it's clear what the model is here. There's like there's a circle here. Whatever is inside is one class, whatever is outside is another class, but you have noise in the labels. That's why, because I also set this noise to be very high, but if I set it to low, then now they're all blue in the inside. You can have noise in the Y labels also. You can also change the problem type to be a regression problem. To be like this, for example. So then, like, I have to set a higher learning rate. Yeah. So now you have like two corners, like these values in the top right corner have a higher value, have a value of 1, a blue. These ones have a low value -1. It learns a regression problem to predict a continuous value from -1 to 1. So here's okay. Let's do a more targeted task. So why don't we do the following? Why don't we go to classification again and try to do the spiral? So try to find a setting in which you can wait. Let me see. In which you can learn the spiral problem. Like so try to find a setting of parameters in which you can have a good classification, like a let's say perfect classification on at least on a training data set on this like spiral, because it's a harder data set. So try it, what does it take? How many hidden layers? What kind of learning rates? What kind of how many neurons per layer do you need? So add hidden layers. Add change these parameters. Just try to get this to work. The problem on this spiral. And raise your hand when you've done it. Now come and have a look. You've done it. Nice. Yes.
This takes more epochs to get trained.
Yeah.
But I increase the number of neurons. I just want
I'll hold on to that. Yeah. Let's wait for more people to try to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's overfitting kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It is able to find the boundary.
Yeah.
Having these features, I think, helps. Just x1, x2 is not.
Let's do something. Why all of you have done it? Why don't you connect to Zoom and you share your screen to explain briefly how you've done it, so to everyone you can share it here. Yeah, let's do that. You have the Zoom link, so. So one second. For those of you on Zoom, we'll have a few people share their answers with us. So we'll do that. So also those of you on Zoom, feel free to post on the chat when you finished it, and we can have some of you share your screen and show how you've solved it, and explain for a minute. Okay, let's do that. Let me see. I broke it. Stop share. Okay, do one of you want to join on Zoom and share your screen so we can see your solution? Okay. So go ahead and you can unmute yourself also and explain.
So
So I basically the number of neurons as well as number of hidden layers, as you can see.
Say a bit louder, a bit louder.
Yeah, so I increased the number of neurons as well as the number of hidden layers, and I wanted to see that with less amount of training data, as you can see, can it train, and so basically this is the test data also. So yeah, it is kind of training, but the point is that it is taking a lot number of epochs, and it's still training. I think after 2000 epochs, it was able to classify the data well enough. Yeah, so, and I also added regularization.
Nice. So many neurons and many layers per neuron, and you also use all the features possible. Were the learning rates important? The regularization, those parameters?
Yeah. So I also tested with different learning rates. 0.01 was fine enough, but increasing the learning rate was making it better.
Yeah. A few more volunteers, 1 sec. So can people on Zoom, could people hear that? I want to see some yeses. Yes, you could hear that. Okay, good. So another volunteer who wants to show the solution. Just join on Zoom and share your screen. Just an echo. Oh, there was an echo. Okay. How about Ryan on Zoom? Do you want to share your screen and show us your solution? Ryan Aharari. Oh, okay. It's not converging. Who has a working solution? Who can share it? Okay, go ahead. Let's see it. Are you able to connect?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, nice. Okay, so Luis is showing us our solution. Go ahead, Luis.
So my idea was like to generate these neural network with
Louder, also for people on Zoom. So
my idea was like for each neural network, like to create for the first layers, like 8, then go into 2 and 1, and then I tried like with different features, and I found that those ones were the letters that I could get.
And what about that loss function? Do you kind of do you think it might be even like kind of smoother, or like
I think if I change, for example, the layering rate, it's gonna be smoother, but it's gonna
take longer to exactly. Very nice, very good. Yes. What's the time? It was 24. So kind of. Do you want to end here, or should we have another volunteer, or do you want to? Is anyone particularly keen to show their results? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. Okay. In that case, if not, then we'll stop here. But what I wanted to highlight, the final remark before we finish. Oh, Ryan. Okay. Ryan, go ahead and explain. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. You're still muted, Ryan. Oh. Ryan, you're still muted. Go on and unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying earlier. Is there something you wanted me to say?
Yeah, just explain your solution. Yeah, just explain briefly how you got it.
Yes, I used like less layers, I guess. My solution just tried to like minimize the number of layers and see how many neurons it would take in each layer basically to get it to converge.
Mm-hmm.
So I started by just increasing like the first layer. Then after a while, it kind of started to look more right. So then I got to work on the second layer, just increasing the number, testing it, and then eventually I found that for this third layer and increased the number of neurons, tested it, and mostly converged.
What did you think was important to add?
I think having the second layer with extra neurons helped like balance it out a lot. When this one was higher, it wasn't really doing anything, but when this second layer had like added neurons, it started to smoothen out. So.
Nice. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So one thing I wanted to, a final thing I wanted to say, and that will be it. I just wanted to show how there were so many solutions, even quite a variety of solutions, even many of them with like more neurons, less neurons, and all of them were working. All of them could solve the problem. So there's in general, no one unique solution to these kinds of problems.
It looked to me like having the extra features made a big difference.
Exactly. So that was one thing. Actually, having the extra features made a big difference. Yes. Exactly. So this is one key point. Yes. I also observed this when I was playing with it yesterday. But in general, yeah.
The squared, something that has a curve to it.
Something that has a curve to it.
I used the top
Yes.
4 features. I didn't use the bottom 3, but I used the top 4.
Top 4. Right.
Tons of neurons.
Yeah. So you do notice these things. Yes. Okay. So I hope you got a bit of like also like a understanding of how they all play with each other, like all these kinds of like layers, neurons, parameters, learning rates, activation functions. And you can play around more with it at home, like to get a better understanding. But that's it. There's no unique solution. Sometimes you can have multiple networks giving all of them giving good solutions. So, okay, I'll see you next time on Thursday for the last class. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hi.
Why does the accuracy increase as we add more layers?
As we add more layers, because it can learn a more complex function, more complex transformation.
Isn't it similar to overfitting?
It is. It can overfit. Yes. So you can overfit. So look, when you have like a lot of noise in the data, you can overfit quite easily. So here in this case, you can overfit quite a lot. Like.
I just use 2 features and got a very low loss.
Say it again.
With adding more layers, the loss also reduced. So I was not sure if it's actually overfitting or is it.
You notice? Let's stop here for a sec. So this is overfitting. Look here. So training loss much lower than the test loss. Overfitting generally, like that's the behavior.
Both low test loss on this, but
Yeah.
it has more layers, so I'm not sure if it's overfitting or is it just improving.
Yeah. So